All right, so before we can jump into the coding, we still have to install Python so that we can make sure we're using a relatively updated version of Python, because by default, usually the version of Python installed on your machine is going to be a pretty old one. So we just want to make sure that we're using a relatively new one. So we're going to go to python.org here, and we're going to hover over this download section. It should already automatically identify what operating system you're on, and then you can just click on this button here. So in this case, we're going to be downloading Python 3.9.7. If this version is higher, it's not really going to make that big of a difference. And if you already have Python installed and it happens to be an older version, don't worry about it. I actually also usually use older versions of Python too. I'm not too worried about, having these larger upgrades. I usually work, I think, with Python 3.7. It will all work fine. But yeah, I generally recommend at least having Python 3.7, but if you're installing it new, I recommend going to python.org here and just clicking on this download here, which is just going to download this file, this installer for us that will walk us through the installation process. For Windows, obviously the file that you're going to download is going to be a little bit different, but it will walk you through the same installation process. So we're going to open this up, and we're going to continue through here. And we're going to continue through here after making sure we read the README and the license. And I'm going to select my just standard hard drive to install this on. I'm going to click install here. It's going to ask me for my password in a second. All right, and then it's just going to go ahead and go through the installation process for us. This should go relatively quickly. All right, so there we go. So now we should have a good up-to-date version of Python installed. So I'm going to go ahead and close this here. I'm just going to move the installer to trash because we don't need it anymore. Now I'm going to head back to our PyCharm, and I'm going to go into the terminal here, and I'm just going to make sure that this version of Python was installed. So I'm going to go here into type in Python. Now I'm going to use this -- afterwards and type in version. Now, you'll see in this case, it's going to be a pretty old version of Python. It's going to be version 2.7. So how can we reference a newer version? Well, we can do that using Python 3 here. But this for me is actually also an older version, as you can see. This is Python 3.6. So since we've installed Python 3.9, if I want to use that version of Python, I can type in here Python 3.9. And this is the version of Python that we've now just installed. And we'll come back to this later on, and we'll actually use this to run some of our code, but now we should have the latest version of, or the latest stable version of Python installed so that we can continue to use it. And again, if your version of Python is later, don't really worry about it too much. There isn't really going to be any changes that will happen that will change the way that the code is running. So just make sure that you have this recently up-to-date version of Python installed, and then you can just continue on.